Kennedy Price sat at the defendant's table, the weight of the courtroom pressing heavily on her shoulders. At just 14 years old, she was accused of felony theft and destruction of property, dressed in an orange jumpsuit that felt like the embodiment of her circumstances, restrictive, suffocating, and utterly unjust. The judge, Richard Calloway, exuded a palpable impatience as he shuffled the papers before him, his silver hair slicked back sharply. He was a man accustomed to authority, and yet here sat a child whose freedom hung in the balance. "Via Kennedy Price," the bailiff announced, the cold formality slicing through the air. As Prosecutor Malcolm Reed took the stand, his voice oozed with the confidence of someone who believed he had an open and shut case. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear. The defendant was caught on surveillance footage at Davidson & Copey Jewelry just moments before the store's alarm was triggered. The footage shows her reaching into the display case. Shortly after, a sapphire necklace worth $12,000 vanished into thin air," he stated, arrogance punctuating every word. "We also have a witness who claims to have seen her fleeing the scene." Kennedy remained stoic, her heart pounding but her expression calm. This was not the first time she had heard these accusations. She had replayed this moment in her mind countless times since her arrest. Her public defender, Thomas Lane, shifted uncomfortably beside her, hardly glancing in her direction as he prepared his arguments. "Your Honor," Lane began awkwardly, "my client is only 14. She has no prior offenses." But Reed interjected smoothly, "We cannot ignore the possibility that she might have a criminal history we're unaware of." Without missing a beat, Kennedy spoke up, her voice steady and firm. "Show the footage." The challenge hung in the air, drawing attention. All eyes turned to the prosecutor, who hesitated, betraying the slightest hint of annoyance. Moments later, the courtroom's attention shifted to the wall as a grainy black-and-white video flickered to life. On the screen, a hooded figure approached the display case. Kennedy's heart raced. They could misjudge her appearance, but they couldn't misjudge the truth. As the girl in the video reached in, she held her breath, realizing just how critical this moment was. "Pause it," Kennedy called suddenly, her eyes zeroing in on the left hand of the figure in the video. The room tensed as the image froze, the girl's hand still extended. "Look," Kennedy urged, pointing. "That girl is wearing a ring on her index finger. I don't wear rings." The courtroom buzzed with confusion, the judge hovering on the edge of irritation, yet intrigued. Kennedy seized the moment. "And if you rewind a few seconds, you'll notice something else. Her shoes don't match mine," she rushed, "and neither does the way I walk. If you compare it to when I was arrested, you'll see a difference." Reed clenched his jaw, his confidence wavering. "Circumstantial evidence," he retorted, but his voice lacked conviction. "That's funny," Kennedy shot back, her eyes locking onto his, "because I thought prosecutors loved surveillance footage when it works in their favor." A ripple of murmurs swept through the audience. Judge Calloway leaned back, contemplating her words. "You have quite the sharp eye, Miss Price," he finally said, a hint of respect creeping into his tone. Kennedy stood tall, arms crossed defiantly. "But this isn't a game of spot the difference. I'm on trial for felony theft." The courtroom atmosphere thickened with tension. "I know the burden of proof is on the prosecution," she declared, addressing the jury with newfound confidence. "And as it stands, you're asking me to prove my innocence instead of you proving my guilt." Reed's smirk had already vanished, replaced by an unmistakable frown. The courtroom had shifted. The weight of accusation began to creep off to the corners, overshadowed by her assertive rebuttal. "I wasn't anywhere near that store when the theft happened," she continued as the judge's brows furrowed with intrigue. "And if the witness claims they saw me, then they're mistaken." She could feel the fervor of her words igniting a spark in the gallery. "Witnesses often recall details inaccurately, especially under stress," she argued. "If they described what I was wearing that night, then they are wrong." The judge sighed, a rhythmic tapping of his fingers betraying his thought process. For the first time, Reed was on the defensive, and Kennedy was ready to capitalize on the momentum she had built. "Just yesterday," she continued, unwavering, "I was in my own clothes when arrested. No hoodie. That makes their testimony unreliable. There was a palpable shift in the room. The judge straightened, contemplating the implications of her words. Very well, he announced. Let's proceed with witness testimony. Kennedy's heart raced. Could this be her chance? As the door swung open, a nervous-looking man in his late 50s entered, adjusting his glasses. State your name for the record, Judge Calloway ordered, his eyes focused. Dennis Holloway, he said quietly, his voice trembling. Reed quickly launched into his questions about the fateful night. And you were working at Davidson and Copey? Yes, sir, he replied hesitantly. The prosecutor pressed him. Can you confirm that you saw the defendant that evening? I think so, Dennis replied slowly, his eyes darting. She looked like her, same height and build. But I only saw her for a second when she ran out. Kennedy's heart sank momentarily. Dennis's uncertainty was palpable, and she needed to draw on that. Can I ask Mr. Holloway something? She asked, and Judge Calloway hesitated before nodding. Of course, he said, watching intently. What color was the hoodie? Kennedy asked, locking eyes with Dennis. Gray. I think, he stammered. She seized the moment. But the footage shows black, right? Her pointed question sent a ripple of doubt through the courtroom. Objection! Reed shouted. That's just a minor inconsistency. Minor inconsistencies can lead to major mistakes, Kennedy countered. He wasn't even sure what color the hoodie was. Did you see them take anything? She pressed further, ignoring Reed's outburst. No, Dennis admitted, his face clouded with uncertainty. I mean, I saw someone run out, but... Realization flickered in the gallery. Kennedy turned to meet the jury's eyes. That's the point. No one saw me take anything. There's no stolen necklace. Only assumptions. Judge Calloway ran a hand through his hair, clearly seeking clarity in the storm of words swirling about. Can you confirm what she wore? Reed asked, shifting the focus back to the witness, desperate to regain control. I only saw her for a second, Dennis rambled. Kennedy narrowed her gaze on Reed. And if your case is built on assumptions, what does that tell you? She could see the tide turning, the judge's concern for reasonable doubt mirrored in the jury's apprehensive glances. Reed's composure started to crack. Your Honor, this isn't just about inconsistent eyewitness accounts. Then tell me, Mr. Reed, Kennedy challenged, her confidence surging, where's the missing necklace? You keep saying I'm guilty based on scraps of circumstantial evidence, but without actual evidence of a crime, how can you possibly accuse me? The courtroom fell into stunned silence, the impact of her words hanging like a tangible weight. Finally, the judge spoke, his voice cutting through the tension. Do you have any material evidence tying the defendant to this supposed theft? Reed opened his mouth, caught off guard, but no words emerged. Kennedy took a deep breath, the realization of potential victory lighting her resolve. You want to punish me based on shaky testimony and a poorly lit video. The judge's face hardened. Counselor, do you have tangible proof beyond this meager testimony? Reed remained silent, and Kennedy felt the floor beneath her shift. I didn't know I'd have to defend myself against mere assumptions, she said softly, letting her words sink in. And just like that, the courtroom atmosphere began to change. Judge Calloway leaned back, deliberating the realities of a flawed system. Let's hear from the jury, he finally announced. Every eye turned to the jury as they shuffled out of the room, their deliberation hanging heavily in the air. Was the truth finally beginning to reveal itself? As the jury exited, a collective silence wrapped around the courtroom like an unwelcome fog. Kennedy's heart pounded in her chest. She could almost hear the low murmur of her own pulse, echoing the uncertainty that filled the room. She felt the weight of every gaze, suspicion, intrigue, and even a flicker of admiration built around her still, defiant figure. But the reality of her situation pressed in on her, that a decision made behind closed doors would determine her fate. Your Honor, Reed finally spoke, breaking the tension. I would like to remind everyone that this is still an ongoing trial, and while the defense attempts to cast doubt, we still believe the evidence supports our case. Judge Calloway nodded. But Kennedy could sense the fracture in the prosecutor's confidence. He wasn't speaking with the same authority as before. The judge leaned back in his chair, hands folded, his expression thoughtful. Kennedy turned to her grandfather, who sat steadfastly in the gallery, his eyes brimming with a mix of pride and concern. She could feel his unwavering energy grounding her, reminding her that she was not alone in this fight. "This isn't over," she whispered to herself, the run of nerve transforming into a spark of determination. Finally, the door creaked open, and the jury filed back into the room, their expressions a muted mix of concentration and deliberation. Kennedy's heart raced as they took their seats, an electric anticipation thrumming through the air. She focused on the foreman, who stood as if balancing the weight of the world on his shoulders. "We, the jury, find the defendant," he paused, letting the weight of the moment hang in the air. "Not guilty." The words struck like a lightning bolt, echoing loudly against the walls of the courtroom. Gasps erupted from the gallery as disbelief spread like wildfire. Kennedy froze. She had braced herself for the worst. But hearing those words changed everything. Judge Calloway nodded, his gavel raised momentarily. "Order in the court," he exclaimed. But Kennedy was already lost in the whirlwind of relief and shock enveloping her. As she slowly processed the verdict, she caught sight of Reed's face contorted in anger. He slammed a file shut on the table, frustration radiating from him despite the judge's calls for calm. Kennedy turned, her heart swelling with gratitude for the strangers who believed in her when she could barely believe in herself. "Milton Reynolds," the foreman of the jury continued, "we find that the evidence presented does not meet the threshold of beyond a reasonable doubt and urge the court to consider the implications of wrongful conviction." The room felt electric now, the implications of those words stirring a quiet revolution. An innocence claimed amidst a system often shrouded in bias, a spotlight cast on the flaws that had brought her here in the first place. With reassurance flooding his features, Elijah silently mouthed, "You did it." The relief washed over Kennedy like a wave of warmth as the judge acknowledged the verdict. "The defendant is free to go," he declared, and Kennedy finally stood, her legs unsteady but her spirit soaring. After a quick exchange of paperwork, she took a breath as the harsh orange of her jumpsuit was replaced by the cool air of freedom. Outside of the courtroom, the sun shone brightly. Her grandfather placed a supportive hand on her shoulder as they stepped onto the sidewalk, where onlookers and media had gathered, intrigued by the spectacle and the young girl who had turned the tide. Just as she moved to emerge into the crowd, Reed's voice sliced through the air, catching her attention. "This isn't over, Kennedy. I will ensure that the justice system doesn't allow your little games to go unchallenged." Kennedy toned slightly. "You're the one who needs to reconsider your approach, Mr. Reed," she said, her voice steady like steel. "Accusing someone without solid evidence isn't just a game. It's a crime." With that, they moved past him, the murmur of interest swirling around them. Cameras clicked, capturing the moment of victory and the subtle strength in her stance. The noise of the world around her faded, narrowing her focus on the path ahead. Yet, just as they stepped away from the courthouse, a nagging worry settled in her gut. This might feel like a victory, but was it truly enough to shake the system? As her grandfather held her gaze, ready to celebrate, she felt a determination blossom inside her. She knew the fight wasn't just for herself. It was for those who didn't have a voice, for all the kids who found themselves in ambiguous situations like hers. "Where to now?" Elijah asked, a soft smile breaking through. Kennedy took a deep breath, her heart racing with the possibilities. "First, we need to talk with the publications. I want to share what happened today, and not just for me but for all the kids wrongfully accused." Elijah nodded approvingly, but concern etched itself on his brow. "Just be careful, Ken. Not everyone will be on your side." "I know," she replied thoughtfully, "but if we don't raise awareness, we're letting this happen to others without a fight." As they walked toward the nearest cafe, hope coursed through her veins, igniting a sense of purpose. She was no longer merely a girl recovering from a near-crushing blow. She was a conqueror, ready to challenge the world that had tried to label her innocent spirit as guilty. Yet, as they crossed the street, Kennedy caught sight of a small group huddled beneath a tree. Curiously, She slowed, heart pounding again, anxiety flickering like a flame. This wasn't over after all. How many had found themselves in her shoes? They nodded toward her, recognition in their eyes, and she felt that strange, urgent pull to speak out, to connect, to advocate. "Hey," she called out, her voice bright and drawing the group's attention. "Do you want to hear what happened in the courtroom?" The young faces brightened, and in that moment, she understood her new purpose: to empower others, to share not just her story but to ensure no one would feel alone in a world that could feel so cold and unforgiving. As she began to speak, a flicker of realization ignited within her. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but it stretched wide and open, and she began to walk it, step by step. Right as she stood before them, she felt a subtle shift, like the first stirrings of change. From that day forward, she wasn't just a survivor of circumstance. She was a voice for those unheard in a system that often turned its back. The courtroom had only been the beginning. The journey to expose the flawed fabric of justice lay ahead, and she was ready to dig in with every ounce of her strength. The group of attentive faces surrounded Kennedy, their curious eyes brimming with empathy, and she felt an unexpected rush of energy. It invigorated her spirit, turning the remnants of exhaustion from her day in court into a palpable determination. She spoke, each word carefully selected, confident that her experience could be a beacon of hope in a world laden with doubt. "I faced felony charges today," she began, steadying herself at the forefront of their attention. "But I'm not guilty, and I shouldn't have had to prove that. I was accused based on an unreliable witness and shaky video footage." There was a collective gasp, and she sensed the weight of her words settling in. It's easy to label someone when all you have is a story that fits. But stories can be misleading. Remember that. A boy in the front, perhaps around 13 with glasses slipping down his nose, raised his hand shyly. "What did you say to convince them?" Kennedy smiled, encouraged by his interest. "I didn't just argue. I challenged their assumptions. I pointed out the inconsistencies in the prosecution's case. It was like being on a game show. We had to prove that what they thought was the truth needed to be questioned." A girl with shiny braids leaned forward eagerly. "So, you mean even if it looks like someone did something bad, it doesn't mean they actually did?" "Exactly," Kennedy replied, her heart warmed by their understanding. "No one should be punished based solely on someone else's snap judgment. And that's why it's so important to know your rights." She saw light bulbs click to life in the eyes around her, a shared recognition of the importance of empowerment. We need to be vigilant, protect ourselves, and advocate for others. If you see something unfair, don't just stand by. Speak up. She felt a fire igniting within her. This was her purpose, her calling. As they gathered closer, it dawned on her that she had become a catalyst, a sounding board for all those who had once felt voiceless, afraid, trapped. Kennedy shared not only her battlefield stories but also pointed out resources, hotlines, and advocates who could help if someone ever felt wronged. Just as she finished, the distant sound of sirens sliced through the peaceful atmosphere, causing a flicker of unease among the group. Kennedy turned instinctively, her heart skipping a beat. What if they had come to question her? Had Reed suddenly decided to pursue charges again? She mustered her resolve, pushing fear aside, reminding herself of the victory she had just claimed. "Maybe they've come for a different reason," she said lightly, trying to ease the tension. "Or perhaps it's just a routine check. Not everything is meant to be sinister." Yet unease lingered in the air, and as the echoes of sirens faded into the distance, the conversation resumed, lighter this time. They spoke of school, summer plans, and the shows they were binge-watching. Yet beneath the laughter and camaraderie, they all shared a newfound understanding of justice and responsibility. After some time, Kennedy glanced up to the sky, the evening sun sinking lower, casting golden rays that splashed across the pavement. "I have to go," she said reluctantly, careful not to seem rushed but understanding the weight of what lay ahead. "Things are just getting started for me, and I'm not done fighting for justice." The boy with glasses spoke up again. "Can we keep in touch? Maybe start a club or something. About knowing our rights." "Absolutely," Kennedy exclaimed, filled with a sense of hope. I'd love to help you all create a community that stands up for each other. As she exchanged numbers and made outlines for future discussions, a voice from the back interrupted her thoughts. "Hey, Kennedy." It was a familiar voice, tinged with annoyance. She turned to see Lila, one of her classmates, striding toward her. "Lila, what's up?" Kennedy asked, her tone shifting. Lila had never been one to shy away from conflict, and Kennedy braced herself for a confrontation. "I heard you got off," Lila said, barely bothering to mask her skepticism. "But don't you think people will still think you did it? Just because you walked out of that courtroom doesn't mean they won't see you differently." Kennedy squared her shoulders, taking a breath to steady her thoughts. "Today, I stood up for myself. I showed that just because someone thinks something, you don't have to accept it as truth." Lila scoffed lightly. "Sure, but what about next time? The world doesn't work like that. You know, people are going to judge, always." Kennedy resisted the urge to let negativity seep in. "You're right, they will judge. But I'm changing that narrative, even if just one person at a time. Where I've been doesn't define where I'm going. And you can be part of that change, too." With her heart pounding, Kennedy hoped her words would resonate. Lila regarded her for a moment, her expression shifting from doubt to contemplation. "Maybe," Lila replied slowly, "but you've got to keep your head down. Understand?" "I can't do that," Kennedy said with resolve. "Hiding isn't an option anymore." As Lila brushed past her, Kennedy felt mixed emotions of triumph and frustration. She turned back toward the group of young advocates, a small smile creeping over her face. They were excitedly planning their next meeting and discussing potential topics. But underneath that sense of accomplishment lingered uncertainty. Deep within, she wondered if Reed would retaliate, if he might dig deeper to find a way to strike back. The unsettling thought quietly slithered into her mind. What if the victory in the courtroom was just the beginning? As dusk settled in, an uneasy anticipation lingered. She knew this wouldn't be an isolated incident. The fight for justice often loomed in the shadows, ever present. With her grandfather waiting just beyond the street, she took one last look back at her new friends. Determined, she promised herself that she would not let the fear of what could happen stop her from challenging the injustices that plagued their lives, starting with the knowledge she could share. "Let's take this further," she murmured, excitement kindling within. "This is only the beginning." And with that, Kennedy felt the dawning of her future, one where her voice would not only rise for herself but resonate for an entire generation eager to learn, advocate, and empower. As she stepped into the fading sunlight, she couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows would not easily be brushed aside, and her journey was only beginning. As Kennedy walked away from the group, her heart stirred with a blend of hope and trepidation. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows that mingled with her thoughts. She knew that while today had marked a triumph, it also signaled the opening of a wider battle against the silence and ignorance that too often surrounded justice. Her grandfather's proud smile greeted her as she approached. "How did it go?" he asked, lifting his arm for a quick side hug. "They're eager to be a part of something bigger," she replied, her heart swelling as she recounted the day's events. "We've agreed to start a club focused on advocacy and rights. I want to help them understand that they have voices worth hearing." Elijah nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "That sounds wonderful, Kennedy. You have a rare gift for inspiring others." They continued down the sidewalk, the chill of evening settling in the air. Kennedy could feel her thoughts dance just beneath the surface. "But it's not going to be easy. I can't help but worry about Reed's next move. He's been lurking around too much, and I sense he won't let me get away with this." "That's your adversary's game," Elijah remarked, his voice steady. "But remember, you're now placed on an unexpected platform. You have supporters behind you now, people who felt silence before." She nodded, resolving to harness that newfound strength. "You're right, Grandpa. I'll turn this into something positive. If Reed wants to come after me, then I'll shine a light on whatever darkness is hiding." An idea flickered like a candle flame, illuminating possibilities. That night, as she lay in bed, thoughts of her plan swirled like leaves caught in a tempest. She envisioned meetings filled with laughter and determination, where stories revealed injustices and whisperings of bravery would transform into a collective roar. With an unexpected passion simmering just beneath her skin, Kennedy jotted down plans in her notebook, a rough outline for her first meeting, a way to frame the conversation around justice and, crucially, community. Sleep came slowly, thoughts pulling her in various directions during the night. She felt alive with purpose, yet the distant rumble of uncertainty rumbled just outside her dreams. She had evaded the shadows for now, but they were still present, lurking on the periphery. The next morning, Kennedy awoke with renewed resolve. Breathless anticipation tinged her every ounce of energy. She dressed quickly and scrambled to gather her materials for the club meeting at the local community center. She was both the founder and the heartbeat of this initiative, a role destined to solidify her commitment to justice for others. When she arrived at the center, the spacious room buzzed with conversation. Her friends greeted her, excitement crackling like electricity. They all took their seats, and she felt a surge of adrenaline course through her. "Welcome to our first meeting of the Alliance for Justice," she declared, standing at the front. "Today, let's discuss what justice means to each of us, and how our individual stories shape our understanding of the world," she encouraged, watching as hands shot up eagerly from various corners of the room. Each story shared excited her, weaving together a tapestry of experiences marked by resilience and hope. A girl shared her story of being bullied. Another spoke about injustice in her neighborhood, while the boy with glasses from before recounted a similar experience with unfair school discipline. With every shared insight, an understanding strengthened among them, an invisible thread linking their hearts. Kennedy encouraged them, teaching them how to ask questions, how to seek out truths. Every experience matters, and the combination of our voices can spark change even when we feel small. As the meeting stretched, the conversation transitioned toward practical actions. "We should plan an event to raise awareness, maybe a rally or a letter-writing campaign directed at local government," Kennedy suggested, and she felt the collective enthusiasm swell. "Yes, we could invite local leaders or activists to speak," added the girl with braids. "Let's show them we're serious. This is just the beginning." The buzz within the room exploded into excitement, filled with ideas and dreams taking shape. They left the meeting that day electrified, a sense of camaraderie forming among them. But as they dispersed, Kennedy felt that familiar stare of apprehension clawing at her. Afterwards, she made her way to her favorite quiet spot at the edge of the local park, a small alcove surrounded by trees, the breeze rustling the leaves above. She reflected on what lay ahead, knowing Reed wasn't going to simply fade into the background while she sparked change. But as the sky deepened into dusky hues, her determination solidified. The resonance of her new mission pulsed through her veins, and she realized that she couldn't be afraid of whatever lay in the shadows. If she had learned anything, it was that real power lay in unity, in lifting one another up rather than standing alone. That evening, she resolved to prepare for Reed and any potential obstacles he might present. "If he wants to play this game, then I'll need to learn the rules," she muttered to herself, outlining her next steps. Days turned into weeks, and with every subsequent meeting, the group solidified into a cooperative being, determined to not merely speak for themselves but for all who felt the weight of injustice. They began connecting with local media and allies, learning to compose persuasive communications, and gathering resources that could empower their initiatives. But the undercurrent of anxiety wafted around them like smoke, swirling just out of reach. Each setback or hint of opposition flared her vigilance. As she faced those challenges head-on, she held tight to her belief that good could always rise to the surface, even in murky waters.